I've been trading crypto for quite a while now, and I've been running this YouTube channel for a long time, too. Right now, what's happening in the world is exactly what I warned you about 5 years ago. And I won't shy away from saying it. This is the most important topic that could exist today, yet no one is talking about it. Even though I voiced these thoughts 5 years ago. I'll start with some background. That's the title of the video, which I recorded on June 24th, 2019. I'm waiting for Bitcoin to pull back to $5,000, $6,000, and I'll explain how and why Bitcoin will be pushed above $20,000. If anyone is interested, you can search for the title on YouTube and watch it. The video is only 15 minutes long. But I'll include the most key points and things from there as inserts in this material. Let's start with what I noted on the chart. This one marked the date when I recorded this material. Well, actually, even from the thumbnail, you can see what was happening with Bitcoin at that time. And here in the video, the material is divided into two parts. And on the channel, basically, if you look at any market analysis I do, it's divided in one way or another into two parts. Short term, what will happen to the market, and long term. So, in the first half, I explain why and how Bitcoin will drop to $5,000, $6,000. And here's the second part, which is more interesting for us right now. Why and how Bitcoin will be pushed above $20,000. At that time, it seemed like an incredible milestone. Well, let me remind you once again, at the time I recorded that video, Bitcoin was valued at $11,000, and the previous high was exactly $20,000. So the first thing I want to say is that I started feeling the market not a year ago, not 2 years ago, but quite a while back. And here's the first point I want you to listen to. And within, I think, a week, maybe 3, 4, 5, or 7 days, Bitcoin could very well drop by about 40%. What conclusions can be drawn from this fragment? As you can see, I predicted everything brilliantly and with almost 100% accuracy. So Bitcoin dropped to $5,000, $6,000, but that didn't happen, of course, in just a week. For a week, Bitcoin stayed in place with quite a bit of volatility, and it actually started to drop only after a couple of months. What does this indicate? If you've ever tried trading on the exchange and attempted to guess the price, with some degree of probability, you can indeed guess the price and say that yes, Bitcoin, it will reach a mark, for example, $90,000 or $120,000, but guessing the exact date when this will happen is absolutely impossible. I used to try to do that. By the way, you haven't seen much of that on my channel in recent years, but before I really tried to guess the date and that didn't work out. The direction, as you can see, I clearly and accurately said that yes, Bitcoin won't go from $11,000 to $20,000. It will first drop to $5,000, $6,000 and only then will they push it up. But there's a little mistake with the dates. So let's not pay attention to the dates. And if I say that the key idea of this video will happen with the market, with the world in the next 5 years, I might be wrong. Well, it might happen within a year, maybe in 2 years, or maybe in 5 years. Maybe even if I say 5 years, I could be wrong, but that's not the main point. When this happens, it's important to understand that everything has been leading up to this point, even back then, and now we are already we are on the brink of very important upheavals. For the last 2 years, I've been trading on the Bybit exchange. This is the top platform in terms of trading volume and liquidity, which means your orders will be executed here at the best prices and with minimal slippage. Just by doing this, you'll save a few $100s a month compared to trading on any other exchange. In addition, there are low fees and a bonus for signing up through my referral link. From the description, you'll receive a gift of $50 to $30,000 depending on the size of your deposit. Right now, click the link in the description, then hit that button and check the size of the bonus you'll get for signing up. On average, my subscribers receive about $100 for signing up on the Bybit exchange, but if you have a large deposit and a corresponding trading volume, you can get up to $30,000 as a bonus. The link is below, sign up, it will take just a few minutes. The second point I want to show you, and earlier, if you watch my videos with long-term debits, I said that Bitcoin could go above $20,000. Moreover, I stated at some points that I don't believe Bitcoin will actually go back up there, upwards. However, with such statements, and with the statement that I will show you in just a moment later, I realized that those who are pushing the market up have goals that won't just take us down. They have a bigger picture in mind. The goal and the aim are people who are lower than you. The market works in such a way that they first push the price up, and then they lure people in to buy. If you traded or invested in crypto back in 2017 or even in 2021, you felt it firsthand. When the price is already near the highs, that's when Smith starts chopping it up, saying, "Guys, bye-bye, you'll be rich." Bitcoin at $1 million? On the contrary, when the price is near the lows, Bitcoin is not needed by anyone. And in the media, there were all sorts of thoughts published that Bitcoin should be sold, that it's a financial pyramid, that it will drop to zero, and so on. And by the way, when I was recording this material, everyone around was also urging people to get into the market. Well, actually, that helped me determine that we were close to the maximum at that time. So, if you look at the market right now, nothing even close to that is happening. Something slightly different is happening. Things, and here ordinary people are already, well, it is clear that they are being driven, and one way or another people come in themselves, but ordinary people, their money now no longer makes any sense. That is, if we look at these cycles, yes, how Bitcoin grew vertically, shot up in 2014, in 2017, in 2021, let's put it this way, larger investors were coming in, all at once, and it's clear that ordinary people can only push Bitcoin to a market cap. Well, for example, in the range of several $100 billion to $1 trillion, they won't be able to drive up the market cap here in any way. Obviously, this requires investments of a larger scale, and no one is pushing people into this right now. They started bringing in some of the first institutional investors here. Some corporations were issuing bonds, and they were already beginning to look for bonds and borrowing Bitcoin back then. Here we are in 2017, yes, ordinary people. Something different is happening now. And notice that this coincided with the moment when Bitcoin was pushing above 20,000. But it's not really about the people. The question is, who is it about? Who is pushing the price above 20,000? Those who need to create some kind of market, they drive into the masses, they hammer into the heads of potential large investors. The idea that Bitcoin is a safe haven asset. Bitcoin is a safe haven asset. Have you heard that phrase? And surely many of you think that way because it's digital gold, its supply is limited and so on. But now it's obvious to everyone. However, 5 years ago, it didn't seem like news. It sounded crazy because Bitcoin was experiencing huge volatility, and the official stance was that it was considered a financial pyramid all over the world, and everyone was advised to avoid it. The volatility was just insane. What kind of currency is good for saving money if you can buy it, and it can drop by 70% in just a couple of years, especially when there's no inflation? And even more so, even if there were inflation, Bitcoin should be rising, not falling. But what has to happen for a safe haven asset to drop by 70%? It was obvious to everyone, including me, that this asset is far from being a safe haven, and that's exactly why at that time I said that the drop would be around 40, 50, or even 60%. And it happened. Then there was the altcoin season. Then there was that moonshot, the altcoin season. And then there was another drop of 70, 80%. Right now we're in a moonshot, and then the altcoin season will follow. And do you know what comes next? An 80% drop? The market operates under the same rule. They pump up the market, they herd the crowd, they herd the people, they herd the money. Dumb money. Then it all gets wiped out to zero, positions are built up again, and the scale takes in a little more and more money. It's being pumped in here. It's exactly the same scenario. And this is a safe haven asset. Maybe in the sense that it obviously won't be printed more than 21 million. But from the perspective of volatility, this asset is far from being safe. Initially it was only planned, but from the perspective of volatility, this asset is far from being a safe haven. From the perspective of capital protection, this asset is not safe. On the contrary, this is an extremely risky asset. And back then, it was obvious to everyone. Now perhaps some people are starting to forget about it. But let me remind you once again, Bitcoin is an extremely risky asset. Let's move on. And the idea that Bitcoin is a safe haven asset will be more clearly instilled in the masses, and maybe they'll even start to recognize it as such. That's when possibly the most brutal scam in Bitcoin's history will begin, to somehow quote it in the world and recognize it as a safe haven asset. That's when possibly the most brutal scam in Bitcoin's history will begin. In general, throughout all this time, and notice, now Bitcoin is starting to be quoted as a safe haven asset. If in the past it was something far from obvious, it was clear to everyone that this is a super risky instrument, a super risky asset. Someone kept hammering into people's heads that Bitcoin is a safe haven asset. And gradually, with each of these spikes, the targets of the information attacks urging people to buy became more and more focused. Not ordinary people, but guys with money. More companies. Now, the government, but we'll talk about that a bit later. I tend to think that the big player doesn't need our money, but rather the money of those who are at a higher level than us. 5 years ago, the trend of the big player was already obvious to me, and their desire to attract more and more capital to this market. Ordinary people with average salaries were scammed in 2017. For the fifth time, I repeat, institutional investors were scammed in 2021. But they did try to approve the ETF, Partially, but at that moment it didn't work out. Common sense, after all, avoided lobbying for specific market participants. Well, here the ETFs were approved, and now all institutional investors have access to this market if they want. Here, access was also available, but it was specifically not for everyone, and it was tough with high fees and so on. Now, with just 2 clicks, anyone who has access to the American Stock Exchange can invest their money in Bitcoin. And most importantly, the institutional investors were scammed right here. So what's happening now? We're showing this in case you missed it. A deputy presented a bill to adopt Bitcoin standards in Brazil. All of this, similar news, happens after Donald Trump was elected president in the US. Right now, and he announced that the US will create a strategic reserve of Bitcoins, so the US will be buying cryptocurrency Bitcoins for its national balance sheet. So, the bill has already been introduced in the Senate, which provides for the acquisition and storage of Bitcoin cryptocurrency by the US government. In light of this, after that, all possible countries are starting to think about whether they should also have Bitcoins, buy it for their balance. For those interested, just type this title into YouTube. You can watch the full interview with Michael Saylor, but I've noted this moment for myself. So he says in an interview with CNBC that Bitcoin will never drop below 60,000, blah, blah, blah. In the near future, Bitcoin will only go up, blah, blah, blah. Michael Saylor stated that according to his model of the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Bill from Senator Lummis, which he just showed, if passed, it would lead to a 16% reduction in the US national debt. Trillions of dollars. Earlier, Trump questioned the possibility of paying off the US debt with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. So, in order to explain to ordinary Americans what the heck is going on, with the taxes they pay into the US budget, Bitcoin will be purchased. So, let's say I, Donald Trump, bought Bitcoin a couple or 3 years ago at 10 times cheaper than it is now. And now I'm forcing, essentially, Americans won't have a choice whether to buy cryptocurrency with my taxes that I paid, which is 10 times more expensive than it was a couple of years ago, or not to buy it. Well, basically no one will ask that. But obviously, if the majority of people are against this, no one will be able to lobby for it. But what does Trump say? Yes, the US national debt is high. How much is it? $50 trillion? I might be mistaken, but I think it's around 35 trillion. Well, I mean, by the time you watch this video, the actual number will be a bit different. Well, let's say the national debt, the US has $35 trillion, and now we're going to buy Bitcoin with your taxes, and Bitcoin is a safe asset. Just look. Everything will be fine because we will eventually get rid of the national debt. And the people who listen to this are like, yeah, hooray. Wow, there will be less debt, hooray, we need to buy, of course, buy crypto with all my taxes. Should I even mention that whether it's the American government or anyone else buying Bitcoin, they're buying it from someone. So if Trump bought Bitcoin again at $10,000 and pumped the price with his statements up to $100,000, $150,000, and it forces Americans to use their taxes to, the American budget essentially buys itself, meaning it secures its positions. Who are the new rights for ordinary people who have been brainwashed into thinking that now the national debt will be paid off well? But let's think about what national debt really is. National debt is the issuance of bonds. So, America issues government bonds, and accordingly they pay interest on them. Why do they do this? To finance various projects. And if the national debt was something bad, then the countries of America. First of all, they wouldn't be using the opportunity to issue bonds and finance any expenses. Well, they just wouldn't do it. A question arises, well, if it's really bad to accumulate debt, then why do countries issue bonds? Why is all this happening? What's happening? Let me explain how this works. If you have the opportunity to borrow money at, well, for example, 3% per year, inflation, let's say, is also around 3% per year, and you can also invest that money at potentially 5-6%. So per year, well, you take money at 3% per year, invest it at 5% per year, and then there's some inflation happening, and especially if you can control that inflation, meaning you can easily print money. And the USA is essentially the only country in the world whose external debt is denominated in a currency that they control. So, for any country in principle, their external debt is not a problem. Provided, of course, that this money is directed towards promising areas for economic development. But America is in a unique position. It can afford any level of national debt because it prints the money in which that debt is denominated. So even if it were 10 times larger, nothing extraordinary would happen. America can afford this. But such statements are necessary. For what purpose? So that ordinary Americans who have debt and poverty on their minds think, I earn money, but it all goes to pay off my debts, and I can barely feed myself. and so on, such thoughts in my head. Well, yeah, debt, government debt, wow, it turns out there's some kind of debt that the government has. So that's probably why I have little money. Not because I pay taxes and they just disappear. Somewhere into crypto, which has increased tenfold, no. So it turns out there are some debts that the government has. Well, yeah, of course, they should be given, yeah, take all the money that I paid in taxes and put it into crypto. Similar thoughts are currently being shaped in people's minds. Guys, from the government, and what's happening is that Pinchao, the creator of Binance, for example, talks about how the race will be between countries. There is no money set aside for buying bitcoins, that is, for creating a strategic reserve of Bitcoin. The Texas House of Representatives has introduced a bill to create a strategic reserve of bitcoins. The strategic reserve of bitcoins was proposed by the auditor of the state of Alabama, while Pinchao stated that for China, the creation of a BTC reserve is inevitable. Russia is not being left out either. It hasn't bypassed us. Duma Deputy Tkachev proposed that the Ministry of Finance create a strategic Bitcoin reserve in Russia. Florida may launch a strategic Bitcoin reserve by the first quarter of 2025. A presidential candidate in Poland promises to implement a Bitcoin reserve if elected. So, Americans are throwing out the idea of a Bitcoin reserve, and everyone around the world starts noticing it against the backdrop of Bitcoin's rise. The fear of missing out, FOMO, is starting at the level of states and countries. Who is behind all this hype? For me, the answer to this question is obvious. The one who accelerated. The taking of money from people in 2017, the taking of even more money from people and partly from institutions in 2021, and now, in 2025, they will be forcibly taking money. Countries don't have their own budgets. The budget of a country comes only from the taxpayers of that country, and this will be presented to them. We will be closing our national debt. Should I say that if you're not investing money into the economy but just paying off your debts, then the economy will decline? America, well, of course, there are no fools sitting in the economic bloc there. This will not be allowed in any way. This is in addition to what I said about the American national debt and how they can print money. And actually, as you can see from the news I've mentioned, this is literally what has been going on for just 10 minutes. In fact, there are even more similar news stories out there. America doesn't need to invest all its money from taxpayers into Bitcoin in any way. Here, at the very peaks, to create significant activity and secure profits for all the market manipulators. No, America. Maybe they can just make a statement like that and buy crypto with relatively small amounts of money so that American taxpayers don't suffer. And to provoke this hysteria around the world with crypto purchases and then close in on them. What will happen next? They will continue to push Bitcoin up until they start buying on the balance sheets of the USA, on the balance sheets of other countries, on the balance sheets of individual states, including on the balance sheets of all companies around the world. There won't be any shift into a bear market. As long as they don't start buying crypto here, there won't be any turnaround. So first, all the manipulators, all the creators of this market will need to unload their positions, and that will take some time at the very peaks. Exactly, when they start buying all of this for their own accounts, and then, as usual, following the exact same pattern, minus 80%. And maybe because they will lose money? Here everything is already total, if suddenly the Americans still have a lot of their own money. Taxpayers will invest here. This could also result in some kind of serious financial crisis. And just imagine how much Bitcoin would drop if it turns out that these guys start dumping it, trying to pull out at least some money from there. Well, it can drop not just by 80%, it can drop another 80% after that initial 80% drop. Well, I mean, something terrible is going to happen. What will happen after this drop, to be honest, I don't know. It's already 50-50. Maybe people will believe in Bitcoin again, or maybe it will be banned at the legislative level. In general, all countries will recognize it as a big mistake and a scam, so there's no point in making predictions here. It will all depend on the circumstances and the world's reaction. And it depends on the severity of this crisis. But yes, no, that's really looking too far ahead. So, what do we do now? You need to stay in the market and make money from it. People are being driven, people are being led to slaughter. Well, be calm in the market, the one who walks over heads makes money. So, we step on the heads of these people, and somewhere around the point where they start buying, that's when we'll unload. It's important to exit at the right time, and then, when the crisis hits and people and the state are broke, many companies will go bankrupt. When to start buying is uncertain. Predicting 5 years ago what would happen now would not have been accurate. Right here at the highs, that's where we'll be buying when that happens, but it's hard to say when. I don't think that if 5 years ago I recorded a video like this where I told everything, that would happen in the next 5 years. I could never have imagined it would take 5 years. I thought it would take much less time. And when we hit $20,000, similar movements will be happening here. But I don't think it will take another 5 years to realize this scenario. So no more than 5 years. I'm also giving into these scary things. Subscribe to the channel here. I'm explaining how to make money in the market, including from these movements. Good luck.